everyone, wherever you might be in terms of a time zone. We are here to share with you some thoughts on COVID-19's impact and responses to the crises that it has catalyzed. I am Victoria Marsick. I'm the academic director and a professor in the Department of Organization of Leadership Program of Adult Learning and Leadership at Teachers College, and we welcome you. We will hear from panelists in public safety here at Teachers College, at the Columbia University Earth Institute, the U.S. Army, and the Columbia-Harlem Small Business Development Center. In just a few minutes, Brian will introduce the panelists and we'll begin. This event is sponsored by AllNet, which is a student network associated with the Adult Learning and Leadership Program in cooperation with the Office of Student Life and Development. And before we start, we want to give a big thanks and shout out for the many professionals and support staff who are helping to bring this event to you. I would like to say just a few words about why I think this is such an important panel. We're not the first generation of people to live through a pandemic. There have been things like the Black Plague in the 1300s, the Cocolizo epidemic in the 1500s in Mexico and Central America, the American plagues that the settlers brought to this continent, the Spanish flu, which was misnamed in 1918, and more recently AIDS, swine flu, Ebola, and Zika, among others. There's no doubt that pandemics change the course of history. They also test the strength, conviction, and courage of the people who live through them. COVID-19 has already toppled the myth that the United States is exceptional. Its impact has been compounded because it is combined with the horrific deaths by police brutality of George Floyd, Rayshard Brooks, and many other innocent citizens. Their deaths have made brutally apparent that many African Americans and other people of color have died at the hands of law enforcement and/or white supremacists. It has given rise to a very vigorous, widespread social justice movement, and it calls for changes in structural racism. We are now approaching a milestone in some ways of almost 100,000 new cases a day by September. So at this time, we also need to consider how COVID-19 has impacted people and life in this United States and around the world. In that regard, African Americans and people of color have suffered disproportionately, at least in the United States, in large part because of crowded living conditions, economic disparities that were there for a long time since slavery, and the fact that they are often on the front lines in service positions and healthcare positions. By contrast, those who are more economically advantaged have had an opportunity to stay at home or to work from home, to be a little bit better off under the situation. But COVID-19 has thus shed light on the structural racism that prevents African Americans and people of color from the equality promised by our Declaration of Independence. COVID-19 thus also sheds light on the weakening of our democratic institutions and democratic practices in the United States, and the hypocrisy of some of our lofty goals. We have much to learn and much to do as adult educators in today's world. COVID-19 calls for critical thinking, digital literacies, civic engagement, and importantly, caring and respect for all in the community. In the face of COVID-19, we need to take action in the short run to protect ourselves and others, but also in the long run to seize this disorienting dilemma in society, to deeply question the way we live, work, educate, and govern ourselves. Today's panel will help you understand how the institutions represented are taking steps to address what they see as key priorities in their sphere of influence, made glaringly apparent by COVID-19. So I welcome you to this conversation, and I am introducing Brian Ahn, who has graciously organized this panel for us and will lead us in the conversation. Brian?
Thank you, Professor Marsick, and everyone who made this event possible, including the Office of Graduate Student Life and Development, all the panelists, the Adult Learning and Leadership Program, and the Adult Learning and Leadership Network. This event was started because of COVID-19 and how it has affected Teachers College, Columbia University, New York City, and the whole world. This is an unprecedented time, and so this panel discussion was made so that all the people in TCM Columbia and anyone who would like to watch could see what all these different agencies are doing, some of their resources, and some of their perspectives that they also bring. On this panel discussion, we have Mr. Joshua DeVincenzo, who is a doctoral student in the Adult Learning and Leadership Program, all, and who is the instructional designer of the National Center for Disaster Preparedness in the Earth Institute. Second, we have Major Jamie Hickman, who will represent the military, also a doctoral student in the ALL program, and who's also the co-facilitator. Third, we have Ms. Kaaryn Nailor Simmons, who is the director of the Columbia-Harlem Small Business Development Center. And last but not least, we have Hoi-Ming, who is the associate director of Teachers College Public Safety. This panel discussion has been scheduled for an hour, and afterwards there will be a Q&A session with Major Jamie Hickman being the moderator for about 15 to 30 minutes. But there's been a lot of various developments that have occurred during the past few months, so we will try to keep within the hour and a half time frame designated for this event. You can ask any questions that you have anytime during the discussion to any of the panelists in the chat box below, and we will get to it during the Q&A session. Oh, and Mr. So, I see that you're in your office right now, so if you need to take a phone call at all, just can you mute your mic and then we'll get back to you?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you. So to begin, let's start with the Earth Institute. Hi, Josh. How are you?
Good, Brian. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you for everything that you're doing, by the way. And is there any information, additional information about COVID-19 that the Earth Institute can provide right now?
Sure. First, thank you to the fellow panelists. Thank you to the AllNet for putting this panel on. I've learned a lot even just from getting to know the fellow panelists and talking through their experiences of COVID-19. I will speak more closely to the Earth Institute and specifically the National Center for Disaster Preparedness, of which I am part of. The Earth Institute across its different centers, it compiles around, I think on the upper end of 20 different centers that are focused on all things environment, climatological, and public health. The National Center for Disaster Preparedness that I work for has a long tradition in the public health sphere. So at the emergence of the COVID-19, we've been able to really hit the ground running in terms of practice and research and thought leadership. The Earth Institute, of course, has several different perspectives. You have anything from, again, virologists looking at the obstacles, but specifically to my center, what we're looking at are more of the social structures. So anything from economic recovery to housing recovery to children in crisis, so resilient children and resilient communities. So we've been pretty busy.
Oh, thank you, Josh. And also, by any chance, do you have, does the Earth Institute have any partnership with any federal agency?
So federal agencies for a long time have been the funding source for much of research. So Columbia University, of course, has federal support, several different departments. The one that I can talk to closely to is our partnership with the Department of Homeland Security and the Federal Emergency Management Agency, more commonly known as FEMA. We've been working with FEMA on training grants since 2016 on topics of housing recovery and economic recovery at the national scale. So it's been a large scope project in that sense where we, the target audience is the United States of America. And what we're looking to do is provide curriculum to first responders, emergency management communities on topics of economic impact analysis, financial literacy for individuals and households, business financial literacies. And of course, just be there to create curriculum that people can make sense of the different government policies that if you ever read through a government policy, you know they're very dense. So what we're doing is really working in that translation function to bring it to the public and to general audiences when they need it the most.
Well, thank you for working with FEMA and everything. We really need the Earth Institute to do all the research that you guys are doing. And also, I was wondering if you could comment on the recent upsurge or upward trend of COVID-19 in different states. Do you think that the trend could possibly go down? And could the social distancing, face masks, and quarantining, do you think they will have any effect?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question. That's a question everybody's asking. I think what we witnessed pursuing different reopening strategies across the country is the fact that we have had to balance really what are economic priorities of reopening and what are public health concerns. What we've seen, unfortunately, is that it's fallen within partisan lines to the point where we get it garners a lot of conflict in the country, even to the point of wearing face masks, for example. What we need is really face mask compliance on a large scale. What we've seen when in trying to balance the economics and the public health components of this crisis is in fact more on the sociological side, that people are becoming pandemic fatigued, that they're growing exhausted of social distancing. Whereas we need to really have clear expectations from the leadership level that this is really a long term and we're in this for the long haul. Of course, projecting and modeling the right behaviors from leadership is essentially the most important right now for us to actually see the number of cases go down. But we also need to prioritize public health right now more than anything else.
So that brings me to the next question. What do you think scientists, researchers, and teachers can do to help the public know about these guidelines and pretty much help stop the spread of this disease or virus?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's really what we're focused on at the center. It's trying to take some of these very complicated subject matter and bring it into a broader system, an education system, in which we can educate folks on a systems level where they fit into the broader picture of regaining normalcy or transitioning into what will be the post-COVID era. What we need to do as educators is, of course, understand how to humanize this in a way that it resonates with folks. There's still some perceived distance from folks around how the amount of urgency to take COVID-19. I think New York is situated in a very productive way, in the sense that there was a point where we were the epicenter for COVID-19. So the amount of gravity in which we take it is helped to ensure that people are wearing face masks, people are taking the right precautions, people are getting tested.
And how long do you think, perhaps, in your opinion, how long will the COVID-19 pandemic be around for?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the way I'd like to answer that is more on the economic impact analysis side of the house, is the fact that we need to be weighing strategically what is a direct impact. So and those are usually the easier of which to conceptualize, because they're tangible. We see businesses are closing. We see people are getting sick. That's the direct impact. What we need to really grapple with in terms of the longevity of COVID-19 are more so the indirect impacts. So what is this ripple effect? So the direct impacts are more additive in that sense, where we can add it into like an expense sheet, how much this pandemic is costing us in more capital or even human capital. But what we need to know is the indirect impact. So what is the more multiplicative? So the things that are just going to maximize throughout. What we've seen actually in a fascinating way, I know we're going to talk about it on this panel, is the indirect impacts have compounded in such a way, and not just the indirect impacts of the pandemic, but indirect impacts of a long legacy of inequalities in our country have surfaced because of this pandemic. So what we're dealing with and what we're trying to navigate is actually a lot of indirect impacts. I don't think that will be different for COVID-19. We'll be dealing with indirect impacts of COVID-19 generations into the future. So even if things reopen and normalcy is restored, we're going to be still navigating this terrain for quite a while.
Well, that was, thank you for your perspective, Josh. And now to go to the second panelist, who is Major Jamie Hickman, who is the U.S. Army officer and who is representing the military. Hi, Jamie, Major Hickman. How are you?
Hi, how are you, Ryan? Good, thank you.
If I may, I would like to share with the audience a little bit about your background. Besides the fact that you are also a doctoral candidate in the ALL program, you're also a decorated military officer with over 18 years of service starting in 2001. You've had many leadership roles, positions, and you were also the assistant professor at West Point. In addition, you are currently the support operations officer in the 1st Cavalry Division, 1st Air Cavalry Brigade at Fort Hood, Texas. In addition, you were deployed during Operation Iraqi Freedom 1 and 4. Thank you so much for your service.
Thank you so much, Brian. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd first like to start by saying thank you to Professor Marsick, you, Brian, and the Office of Graduate Student Life and Development, the Adult Learning and Leadership Department, and everyone joining us today as we navigate this difficult and complex time that our nation faces. Complex on many accounts, as you heard from Professor Marsick, because on one hand, we are facing the complexities of a pandemic, and really on the other, we're kind of challenged with the scar that's an indention on our country known as systemic racism. So the COVID-19 pandemic has developed into a multifaceted crisis like none other, really since the Spanish flu. And I think what we're learning is that there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to resolving this crisis. But what we do know is that it takes all of us coming together and remaining in times such as these. These times can be challenging, but as you will hear today from all the different organizations, that we're stronger together and we're committed to creating lasting change so that all are better prepared and ready when faced with adversities. So lastly, I'll say on that is, we must rely on our values, procedural guidelines, implementing systems and processes, somewhat, attempting to provide some predictability and trust in the experts to kind of help us navigate and find resolution during this crisis. So, thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Jamie. And Jamie, could you tell the audience how the military is, for instance, addressing COVID-19?
Yeah, so the safety and protection really of the force, as well as public safety are a priority, obviously. But, for example, my unit is taking precautionary measures and procedures based on the limitations of COVID-19 to ensure that we comply with the recommended, social distancing requirements and preventative measures set forth by the CDC. So we've maximized our teleworking opportunities, minimized some of our larger scale training exercises to ensure not only the safety of the soldiers, but also the safety of the communities that we serve.
Thank you. And also, Major Hickman, what is strategic readiness in the context of COVID-19?
Yeah, so for me, I think strategic readiness in the COVID-19 era really is the ability to provide, people and adequate resources in a timely manner, really in conjunction with, different organizations and our partners to provide the needs to provide the resources of anyone really in need during these challenging times. I think also with strategic readiness, leaders obviously are going to be faced with a separate set of challenges because of the environment that we're operating in. But we are committed to training and the readiness of our team to ensure that not only are we consistent in readiness, but also prepared and ready when we need to be called on.
Thank you, Jamie, Major Hickman. And could you tell me or anyone what kind of resources can the military give to the public in New York City, such as the Javits Center or anything?
Yeah, I think similar to what I mentioned earlier is people and resources are an important aspect of what we do. But like you saw with the Javits Center, it took really all services coming together to make that effort a success. So again, people and resources are the number one, key to making this successful and helping us also navigate through this difficult terrain.
Thank you, Jamie. And I know that you had COVID-19 before because we talked about it, and I know it was a little hard for you, but could you give the audience members anything that they can learn from the experience and how to deal with, for instance, adversities brought upon by the pandemic?
Yeah, so I was tested positive for COVID-19 back in March. And, what I learned from that really is having to come to the realization that health is priority. Health and taking care of those around you to ensure that they are safe. So that obviously is, family and the public. So doing the right things, isolating myself, actually going into quarantine first and then isolating myself from the general public, which can be difficult. But before I tested positive for COVID-19, I wasn't always the best at, taking care of myself. So I wasn't always eating right and getting adequate amount of sleep. So I definitely saw that with the lack of energy that I had because, being tested and testing positive for COVID-19, that I had to slow down, take a step back. So I used this opportunity really to not only nurse myself back to health, but also I use it to, reflect and, I kind of, force myself to, stay positive during isolation, which again can be very difficult. But I think that coming out on the other side of it, I feel stronger and healthier because of having to go through that experience. So again, I think the biggest keys to success and advice that I would give others is, make sure you're always taking care of yourself and your health, but also it's very, very important to keep golden retriever, keeping those safe around you by doing the right things and taking the precautionary measures set forth by the CDC. Thank you.
Thank you for your service, Jamie, and your perspectives on everything. It really helps. And third, so next panelist is Ms. Simmons, who is the director of the Columbia-Harlem Small Business Development Center, and who also happens to be, according to New York Daily News, as the point person behind the new Columbia University Emergency Loan Fund aimed at helping businesses, small businesses. So thank you, Ms. Simmons, for everything that you're doing to help New York City and helping Upper Manhattan area get better from this. And Ms. Simmons, what is your assessment of what happened because of COVID-19 to businesses in Upper Manhattan?
Well, I think it's definitely been a huge change, really because of pause more than anything else. When everyone had to retreat to their homes, businesses were put in a position where, number one, many of them had to close. Even businesses that were considered essential lost a significant amount of revenue. But those that are not essential are still, in many cases, closed. And I think especially for Upper Manhattan, which is more of a residential, a group of residential neighborhoods, we're in a good position because people are utilizing services like the restaurants, the banks, the hardware stores, more often than businesses that might be in Midtown because they're pretty much still at home. But at the same time, many of those businesses really didn't have the relationships with banks, with certain institutions that they needed in order to access some of the federal funding that was available to them. In addition, those businesses which are storefront businesses, they are neighborhood mom and pop businesses, really operate on a shoestring. They're more often to have very few employees. They have the owners have very close relationships with the employees, and they want to support their employees by any means necessary. And so you saw a lot of business owners choosing to use their own resources, their savings, in order to pay their employees, rather than doing what some of the larger businesses did, which was to put them on the unemployment rolls and then in the hopes that they would bring them back. So it was a very different shift. That said, I know in your original question you asked about specifically the Columbia area. And I live near Columbia, and I utilize the businesses near our campuses as well. And I was very surprised because I was concerned that with our students leaving campus, and many of our faculty also left, and while 70% of our staff members live in Upper Manhattan, there are some that also kind of decamp for northern New York. I was very surprised that many of those businesses are still going strong because of the community that exists beyond Columbia University. Because once again, we are a group of residential neighborhoods. You have people that actually live uptown but work in Midtown, and now they're spending more time uptown, so they're able to utilize some of those businesses. I walked along Broadway in Amsterdam near the Morningside campus a couple of weeks ago, just stopping in to speak to the store owners of stores that were there. And in some cases, they said that they were doing well. They were doing, in some cases, better than well, because there are residents of the Bronx that are no longer going to Midtown, and they may be coming to Harlem and Morningside Heights to do some of their shopping. The farmers markets are doing extremely well because everyone is now focused on fresh fruits and vegetables. So it's been a mixed bag. Our big concern is for those businesses that are still closed, that are in phase 3 or phase 4, and making sure that they open safely and profitably.
Yeah, regarding phase 3, I know that Mayor or Governor Cuomo and Mayor de Blasio were saying that maybe next week phase 3 isn't going to happen. Is that correct?
Well, what they're saying is that the expectation is that phase 3 will happen, but it will not include indoor dining for now, because that's been a little bit too, when people are taking their masks off and eating and talking, they're seeing that's where there's a lot of spread in other states and other regions. So that's a big concern. And so actually, both the Columbia Loan Program and we're starting a social distancing program with architects and engineers to help some of our restaurants and other businesses learn how to create the infrastructure within their business to remain socially distanced as the weather gets worse. Once it does start to get cold and people can't stand on or won't stand on line outside for long periods of time.
Thank you so much, Miss Simmons. And also, I looked at your website for the Small Business Development Center, and on it there is this thing called a Small Business Pandemic Resiliency Guide. Can you explain what that is?
Sure. So before the world changed, we started to see a little bit of the writing on the wall at the SBDC, and started reaching out to all of our clients with just a kind of emergency preparedness guide, not realizing that we were already kind of knee deep in the emergency. Now we're kind of, neck deep in the emergency. But we started, talking to them about kind of, what do you need to do? How do you communicate to your employees? How do you communicate to your vendors, to your customers, to all of your stakeholders? How do you put things into place so that if you need to close down shop and everyone has to work remotely, you have that, you have that. We started communicating with them, I think it was late February, not knowing that there would be no choice by mid-March. And so when the choice was made for all of us, we started looking at how do we update this guide to bring everyone back. So it wasn't just a question of what do you do during the emergency. It was really, what do you do during the emergency so that your business still exists and is resilient after the emergency? That said, throughout March and April, the biggest focus for everyone was really just getting capital. You know, whether you were a business owner, whether you were an employee, whether you were just a person trying to feed your family, trying to make sure, and of course, for all of us that needed, you know, that ran out and bought 50 rolls of toilet paper, we needed to make sure that we had what we needed. And so for about 2 months, that was the focus. Everyone really just kind of making sure that they had the essentials they needed, whether it was money or supplies to live on. Now we are looking at how we can help businesses recover. And we've even changed our logo. Now our logo has changed. It's now Resume, Recover, Resilience, because it's time for everything to resume. It's time for us to get back to work, whether we're still working at home or we're working in the streets in a safe manner. It's time for our businesses to recover, and it's time for us to ensure that that this never happens again. We have always been, so kind of one of my concerns over the past few years has been that the breakdown of the environment would lead to something like this. I didn't think it would happen this soon. So it wasn't a huge surprise to see that, you know, that kind of micro germs are really what's bringing us down instead of a nuclear war. But now we have to ensure that as a nation, as humans, we can make sure that this never happens again. So we are very much focused on resiliency in all forms, and you're hearing about that from every one of the panelists here.
Thank you so much, Ms. Simmons. And also, I heard it's all about resiliency, and thank you for what your center has done in regards to this, especially the Columbia University Emergency Loan Fund. Could you explain what this exactly is?
Sure. So as I mentioned, when all of this started, everyone was focused on capital, making sure that individuals and institutions had the capital they needed to ride this out. And the federal government made some missteps, but they really did an amazing job in a very short period of time of getting short-term capital out to small businesses as quickly as they possibly could. And so we're very, very happy to see that the SBDC, Columbia's Small Business Development Center, was a part of helping with that project. What we did see at the same time was that there were some businesses that were left behind. At the same time, there were businesses that were able to take advantage of the financing, but it really wasn't enough. And so the university trustees and the president's office really decided that it was time to make a commitment, a financial commitment to the small businesses in the areas where we have the 3 campuses, so Northern Manhattan. And we've been very pleased to couple that financial assistance with our educational support as well. So the first loan project that we actually connected to a 1-year long incubator program that we run in conjunction with several partners to help small scale manufacturers bring their products to market and beyond. Now today we are actually launching a working capital fund for storefront businesses in Upper Manhattan. Those are the businesses where if you're walking down the street, you can go in. So retailers, dry cleaners, restaurants, supermarkets, nail salons, hair salons that have extremely high rents and in many cases have been closed because of pause. We're very happy to couple that economic support with the educational support that's offered by Columbia Business School through a pivot program where we're teaching those small business owners how to pivot their business models, and then they can actually apply for the funding that they need in order to pivot those models effectively. And so that loan application process actually begins today.
Well, thank you so much for all this information. But I looked on your the website even more, and I saw that what exactly are the criteria to for businesses to be able to tap into this loan that you're providing.
So the businesses have to have been in business for at least 1 year. So they have to have been a storefront business in business for 1 year. We define a storefront as I mentioned, those businesses that are ground floor or second floor commercial premises that are visible from the street and accessible to the public directly from the street. And that street-facing location is integral to their business model. So that was very important to us, not only because we wanted to support those businesses, but for safety's sake. We want to ensure that throughout Upper Manhattan, we don't have blocks and blocks of storefronts that are closed, commercial spaces that are shut down, if there's something that Columbia could do about it. It creates neighborhood blight, property values decrease, it's a safety issue. Once again, we've been talking about the challenges of race in this country and in Upper Manhattan community neighborhoods in particular. Broken windows policing was the norm for many years, and we're trying to ensure that we don't go back to that. And part of that is by ensuring that the businesses, the safe spaces that Columbia has always worked with and supported remain open.
Thank you. And since you talked about minorities or ethnic minorities, I was wondering if I could ask you this question as well. With regards to COVID-19, how has COVID-19 affected small businesses who are owned by people of color, such as the Black community, Hispanic community, and also the Asian and Asian American communities in Manhattan?
I think that the easiest way to answer that is that those businesses have been historically underbanked and under-networked and undercapitalized. They're less likely to receive capital than banks, than businesses that are owned by white males. And I, to a certain extent, would include white women in that category as well, because it astounds me, some of the things that I've learned about the 70s when I was that women were not able to own real estate and get credit cards and just a variety of things. So, so you have the majority of the population of the United States has historically been underrepresented in its economy.
Thank you so much, Ms. Simmons, for everything that you do and everything that your center is doing. It's amazing. And so next, now we have Hoi-Ming So, the last final panelist, and he is the Associate Director of TC Public Safety. He for 8 years, and he also has been the Supervisor of Public Safety at Barnard College for roughly about 4 years. And also, Mr. So, thank you for all that you've done to keep Teachers College safe, along with the senior leadership of Teachers College, like President Bailey, Vice President Joanne Williams, Provost Stephanie Rowley, and also Assistant Vice President John DeAngelis. In your opinion, what has TC done in response to COVID-19?
Well, first and foremost, I'd like to take this opportunity to first thank, on behalf of public safety, I'd like to thank you and Dr. Marsick for inviting us to this fantastic forum and making this happen. Second, I'd like to take a moment to thank Major Jamie Hickman for their services, because I spent 13 months down at 9/11 and we stood side by side with the military. They were fantastic and professional. And Mr. DeVincenzo, I just want to say thank you. When you were talking about your background, it reminded me of the training that most of our public safety officers have with FEMA and with our NIMS. And I said, wow, that is really a testament as to how much training that we get and how dedicated that our leadership have within public safety. Ms. Simmons, I'd like to thank you You just inspired me to learn about business continuity, especially here on campus. And then on the side, I'll learn a little bit more on the outside about business continuity, especially after a state of emergency or even during a state of emergency. Now, just going back to your question, well, Teachers College have a crisis management plan. And within the crisis management plan, we have a pandemic response plan. So it was created back by about 2008 for the in preparation for other pandemics, but it was actually more for the H1N1 that happened during 2009. We used it as a template for this COVID crisis, but we had to revise and modify it as we go because of the complexity of the COVID crises. We worked it as a living document, and we had to constantly change it, and we had to update and revise it, and it was constantly changing. And some of the biggest challenges that we had was that, if you notice, the federal government, the city and state government had opposing views. I mean, in terms of how to keep safe. And the CDC said, well, let's not wear masks. And the state and city government said, do wear masks. And they had differences of opinion as to how long would the germs last or the virus would last on inanimate objects. Very interesting. That was some of the challenges we went through, and it was but we found a happy medium, and we did our best to safeguard the community. That is also, I just want to say, we started way earlier in planning, all right? It is a testament to the leadership of President Bailey, Joanne Williams, John DeAngelis, and the provost, and the respective staff. I mean, to leave them out is doing an injustice, because we worked as a complete unit, and we were planning for it early on. So we started ordering PPEs, and that's the personal protective equipment. And it's interesting, the personal protective equipment, it wasn't all that easy to get. And for us as essential workers to continue, we needed the PPEs, especially we worked on campus. Public safety was a 24/7 operation. We were still here on campus while this pandemic was going, as well as other essential workers. Okay. President Bailey he started the TC Corona Task Force, and he had also 9 groups, and they broke off to different groups, and they did their research, and they reported back to him. They worked on issues like self-isolation, quarantine, how to limit special events. I know graduation was coming up. They said, well, we're going to have to do virtual graduation. They were keeping an eye on the COVID incidences across the street, our affiliates. And they were also consulting with Columbia Press, our medical professionals. So they were doing all that to bring us the best possible practice, so we could all keep safe. They were talking about remote learning, remote work at home for staff and faculty. By the way, the faculty was fabulous, because they had a hard job too, all right, because they had to plan for something totally new. But we'll get into that. Our difficulty was more in the supply chain, and the cleaning. We've had problems with the cleaning supplies. So eventually everybody went out of their way. Well, actually, it was fantastic. The faculty also had contacts. EHS, or Patrick from our environmental health and safety, he's the director there. He went out of his way to make contacts. The president made contacts. The vice president, John DeAngelis, made contacts. So to make sure that we all had PPEs. But that's not the only thing they did. They also made sure that everyone on campus was safe. So I also want to point out that, interestingly enough, if you look at the president's memo on March 3rd, it came out and he assured the community we had policies and plans in place. And did you notice the very next day, March 4th, then New York, Utah, Kentucky, Massachusetts, California, then they shut down. So you tells you we were ahead of the curve. Then March 11th, WHO declares a pandemic. March 11th, right? Look at how soon we first got the memo to, hey, listen, we got We got a plan. We're working on it. And that's when March 13th, the White House declares a national emergency. So I have to hand it. We have a fantastic senior leadership, and I'll tell you, President Bailey did a great job leading the charge. And
I think so too.
the other thing is, interestingly enough, you just don't know this, but behind the scenes, the people, the essential workers like us, we work 24/7. There was facilities, there was Res Life, there was the mailroom, there was payroll, HR, and all the groups came together, all the divisions came together to work behind the scenes to make our jobs also possible. All right. So during this time, public safety was doing things that we normally may not be doing. We were lending emotional support. We were people who needed emotional support. It ranged from staff, faculty to student. They would come and say, "Hey, we were very anxious. We don't know what to do. Some had COVID, some had needed special attention, so we did that. Some professors wanted their plants watered, so we did that. There was also international students getting COVID, the COVID scam telephone calls, so we were addressing that. We also caught somebody defacing our property while no one was on campus. We caught them. And that's up and coming. And it's been truly an interesting journey.
Thank you. I mean, what you guys do is amazing, and you guys put yourself in harm's way. I feel you guys put yourself really in harm's way. So thank you for everything. And
well, I really think that I thank you for thanking us, but I really think the thanks go to the entire community. Because without the community, we're just a peg on the wheel. I mean, a cog on the wheel. So I have to thank the community for helping us. So, but thank you.
And Mr. So, what is the plan exactly for the fall at TC? Could you comment on some quotes that I have from President Bailey?
President Bailey came out with a memo on June 24th, and he outlines what's coming up in the fall. Now, specifically, classes will be online, and there will be some limited classes that cannot be done online. And he lists certain various things as to the housing issues and what his plans and what he foresees for the future. I think the great thing for the students is that he did 50% off the college fees. So I thought that was great.
Oh, yeah. I see in President Bailey's memo that for the dorms, for instance, he says enhance cleaning and sanitation of the residential buildings and common areas. What is your opinion on this?
I think it's fantastic. First of all, our sanitation and our the way they're cleaning has stepped up tremendously. We did have a supply chain issue. I think we found different sources, and you got to understand the bottom line is his primary goal was that safety first. That was number one goal. And you have to say, hey, listen, I am proud to work here. I am proud to be a TC employee. I'm also proud to be a TC alum.
Oh, thank you. Now, again, thank you for everything that you guys are doing. Everyone in TC Public Safety and all the staff, all the essential workers. But that points me to my next question. Did you guys feel any type of danger during COVID-19, the emergency?
Well, you got to understand the essential workers like public safety. We work 24/7, so we were a lot more exposed, and we had a higher risk to transmission. The facilities people also was here on various hours, and then you had all the other essential workers that were going in and out. Yes, there was a higher risk of getting COVID. As a matter of fact, some of the public safety and facilities people did receive COVID, did get COVID, that is, and they were hospitalized. But I'm happy to report they're all okay now. So that was the light at the tunnel. So yes, it wasn't always that safe, but we made sure that we had our PPEs on. And I'll tell you, our leadership just made sure that we had our PPEs on. So, and they made sure that we always had it resupply. So, I mean, it shows that you care. And by the way, I just want to say that we're talking about memos. I want to say President Bailey was giving out memos every couple of days. And how is that not a testament to his humanity, his professionalism, his caring? I mean, you know, it speaks for itself. That's why you have to be proud to go to school here. You have to be proud to work here. I mean, you can't have it any. I mean, you know, TC lead the way. I'm sorry, I have to borrow from the military, but TC leads the way.
Right. I'm very glad that everything's. That I come here, that I go to Teachers College, but because of all the opportunities that's given. But for instance, because of COVID-19 in particular, did you feel safe traveling to and from work?
Could you elaborate, please?
Oh, I mean, since the beginning of COVID-19, Asians were targeted because of their heritage. And were you targeted as well? Could you give any example? If so.
I remember several occasions, maybe 6 times, while on the bus or the train. I was called names. I was spat at. I was pushed. Someone pulled out something, and I was smart enough to know how to de-escalate the situation. So, if that's what you mean, yes. So I had my share during this time coming to work of not nice things happen. Yes.
I'm sorry to hear that, sir, or Mr. So. Also, you know, I'm Korean American, and my family we in a sense we experienced similar treatment in the early 90s in Los Angeles. Actually, my uncle's store was destroyed during the civil unrest during the early 90s again, and so I heard actually the Korean community here in New York as well on Church Avenue was experiencing some hardships because of this. And there are many stories of Asians being targeted, marginalized, you know, in certain areas in the U.S. history and put into left in the shadows. For instance, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, Japanese internment camps in 1915 because of World War II, Japanese Exclusion Act of 1924, and even right now, because COVID-19, it's for instance, it's fueling some anti-Asian sentiment in the U.S. and around the world in a sense. And so, but again, that's for this a discussion for another time. So thank you, Mr. So, for your service in keeping Teachers College safe and everything. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now I would like to say thank you.
I just want to express, just to sum up, that I just want to say that President Bailey was ahead of the curve. And let me tell you something. And we had a crisis management plan, a pandemic response plan, and it was so apropos. I mean, although we used it as a living document, we did a great job. And I think, and I have to thank the community, because of the community, we would be in a different position now. Our positionality would be different at this moment. But I want to thank everybody. So thank you, Brian.
All right, Brian, do you think this is a good segue to the Q&A session? Oh, I think we might have lost Brian for a little bit. Can everyone else hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. Brian, are you fine with that? You want to move on to Q&A? Okay. So again, thanks to all my fellow panelists. We'll transition to the question and answer portion. This first question is kind of anyone can answer this first one. What kind of leadership, this is from the attendees, what kind of leadership would the panelists like to see right now at the local, state, and or federal level? Josh, you want to take a stab at that one?
Sure. I was actually typing up an answer for the second question as we speak. So I think to answer that question, shifting gears to leadership at the federal, state, and local level, we need to really look at, I think Dr. Marsick said in her introduction, the civics education behind it and understanding where decisions are made at the local level. I would put more onus on the local level, as we've seen kind of in the narratives already talked about on this panel, that much more traction is happening at this local level and very specific. One of the things that is a limitation to the curriculum that we develop is it's at the federal level. So what we need from the leaderships at all those levels is congruence. We need agreement and consistent messaging, because I think that's where we're seeing people really running with different interpretations. I would have liked to see from the CDC, and this is an opinion, this is not a reflective of my organization, more subjectively, I would have liked to see the guidelines be more so regulations, and less of guidelines for that could be interpreted. As Hoi mentioned, TC, we interpreted those guidelines very well, but we haven't seen that across the board. And I think that's been a big lesson learned from leadership across those levels.
Awesome, thank you. Hoi, would you like to add anything to that?
Well, I like to concur with Josh. There were different levels of government that was very draconian in thought, and unfortunately that causes a lot of conflict or even cognitive conflict. So there was transparency issues, and there were also humanistic issues. So yes, I think if they we have to have a higher level of congruence. I totally agree with Josh. But it's very obvious. I mean, if the CDC is switching back and forth, should we wear masks, then you got to ask yourself what's going on. And if the city and state government is also going back and forth, and it's like, what's going on? So unfortunately, it left us as professionals having to figure out what's the best way to fix this problem or address this problem for our community. I mean, stop the politics. Let's care about our community.
Awesome, thank you. We have another question coming in. This one, again, anyone can answer it or respond back. After recovery, how can businesses, especially small businesses, prepare for another outbreak, COVID-19 or otherwise? In other words, what does resiliency look like in a post-COVID world?
I guess I'll take that. The things that we've really been focused a lot on is, as I mentioned, environmental sustainability and technological innovation. And when we talk about environmental sustainability, it's not just about recycled bottles and cans. We're talking about how are you implementing safer products, safer standards in every element of your business, whether it means that you are encouraging your employees to live locally, to work locally, you're purchasing products and all of those products are locally made, starting to question how they're made, also looking at things from a different lens. I think when I first started this in March, thinking about this, we said, okay, there were those two components, the environmental and the technological, but also thinking through the cultural, the historical, the racial, the gender elements of this, because we're seeing that none of us exist in a vacuum. And so the historical, the implications of the historical inequities in this country are hitting the United States economy like with full force. It's no longer just about, oh, well, these people are here and those people are there. Everyone's being affected by this, and it has been for generations. It's just that no one in power had to really take it into account. The innovation, I think, is a necessity. We're going to see a huge change of a huge wealth transfer within and after this this pandemic. And so what does that mean in terms of who the money is being transferred to? Is it just younger generations of the same people? Are resources being diverted in a way that makes sense? Are people going to be able to, are we moving towards a world that is operating more effectively for all of us? That's what we're looking at the SBDC, even on this micro small business level, because it's something that is being examined globally. In Europe, the World Bank is now looking at every element of policy having environmental implications, and we're not doing that in the United States on a large scale. So our clients at the SBDC, we are doing that. We are saying we must look at that in order to prepare you for the new economy, and in order to prepare our communities that have historically been left out of these wealth transfers to move into the next phase of reality.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Professor Marsick, we have a question coming in for you. We'd like to get your thoughts on the perceived tension between economic and public health.
I think that's a question that's very interesting, and probably everybody here would have an answer to it, also from the perspective that they're coming from. And following on Kaaryn's, discussion of wealth transfer, I think that is part of the key to the answer in some ways. But we're thinking about it as a either or kind of thing. And I think that part of that is because although we keep saying we must be in this all together, people are not displaying behavior that suggests they're all in it all together. And so, and their thinking is such that what's in it for me, or what do I need to do? And understandably, I think, as Kaaryn, as you pointed out, in the beginning, everybody kind of went for their needs. If you think about Maslow's hierarchy, you have to start with, are you safe? Are you here? Do you have food? Are your children okay? Are they safe? Do I have housing? Do I have a job? How can I pay for things, etc.? So that is absolutely essential. And it's also true that there are communities that think of that and also think of, and how are my neighbors doing? How are my family doing? What can I do to make sure that we all make it together rather than just me? And so I think it reflects, in some ways, there have been some great conversations in the newspapers and the press around this tension between the individual and the community. And of course, different national and cultural values, weigh in here. But I think we have to get beyond individualistic focus only on ourselves and be able to think about others. And, I know that sounds a little philosophical for the question between tension and public health, but, for people who are just trying to still keep life and death together, think about those people in the, in the food processing plants who have to go back to their jobs, or their families aren't going to live. And so these are really difficult questions to answer. They may wish to weigh in on the side of public health also, but they can't. And so in some ways, I think we have to kind of disaggregate the data, so to speak, about the different perspectives we have around why we're thinking that. And if we could have more conversation rather than shouting at one another, to understand different people's perspectives and to think together about how we can be both and in different communities and in one community in order to, to get through this together. So I know it's not straightforward, but I'm known for answers like it depends. And that's definitely an it depends answer.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your sharing your perspective on that, Professor. Hoi, would you like to add to that as well?
I'm just, wow. Dr. Marsick, so I just want to piggyback on some of the stuff that you said. I think you hit it right on the head. It's about critical reflection. I really believe that. I think we have to have a space where we should all be transparent and talk and communicate and allow for each other to share experiences and have a certain space for critical reflection. And it's I remember reading an article back in the early 2005 or 6 or whatever it was. It was on transformative learning, I believe it was, or something like that. And it was fabulous. And until this very day, I still use certain parts of transformative learning, and it requires that critical learning space, and for us to talk and to have time to understand what the problems are, and then using that to address various issues. So I forgot, I believe the professor was started with an M. Not sure what
Mesereau, Professor.
That's right, Mesereau.
Yeah.
It was a professor, I believe, at Columbia, also
Yes,
at Columbia.
at Teachers College, yeah.
At Teachers College.
Our program, in our department, in our program, Professor Mesereau was in charge of adult learning and leadership prior to his subsequent passing. Yeah.
So, because right after the 9/11, about 2006 or 7, I read that article. Wow, and I started using it, learning and applying some of the stuff that he was talking about. Interesting, very interesting. I'd like to learn more about that. But anyway, I hope I answered the question.
Yeah. No, I might just add that there's one other piece to transformative learning that is not always, because Mesereau was very cognitive, but more recent understandings of it are much more embodied and affective, and recognizing that, in some ways, several of you have talked about the humanizing focus of learning, of what we're doing. And it's in the stories and the examples and the empathy that we can build with one another, and the listening and the human connection that we make, that we understand one another. So, Mesereau's great, and, he also can be a little, not in personal life, he wasn't like that, but in his writing, he can be a little in the head, if you know what I mean. But transformative learning has gotten broader and also more systemic, and adds to the critical reflection. I don't know, should we call it critical empathy? Empathy because it is critical, and listening.
I've used some of the elements of his writing, addressing divisive environments, let's say, whether it's in leadership or management, or even in I know the NYPD uses different levels of transformative learning, and they use different parts of it. And it's not absolute, but it works, and and I have to. It's too bad I never got to meet the professor, but it's excellent.
And I just wanted to also add to this question, because I think it's an important one between public health and economics. And it's actually coming from a lecture I was just at right before this meeting. It was Courtney Cogburn from the School of Social Work. And so she was talking about, empathy has its place, critical reflection is needed. But also when we're navigating this question between public health and economics, this is the point in time where structural change comes into play. This is where we do need to move on this momentum to think of how it's structured, how do we change, and to Dr. Marsick's point, we're conceptualizing this as a public health or economics, and that's exactly what needs to be changed in the structure. So critical thinking, of course, will help us to gather those ideas and organize our thoughts, but it is going to be that tangible action items that we can come about to really restructure what this, so we never have to choose between public health or the economy.
Awesome. Thank you all for providing some feedback on those questions from our attendees. I'm going to turn it back over to Brian now. He has some closing remarks that he wanted to get to.
Thank you, Jamie. Yes, my connection went bad, or it just went off for a second. But yes, I would like to thank you all, the panelists that were part of this, and for the audience members as well. Thank you for listening. this event is not just a one-time event, but actually the Adult Learning and Leadership Network, a student-led organization of the Adult Learning and Leadership Program, will continue to have other very informative events in the coming year and in the future to come. And also, if the audience member would like any more information about these resources and about what these agencies are talking about, please look at the websites below. I just populated all the resources down there in the chat box so that you all could see. And with that, I would like to pass it over to Professor Marsick for some closing remarks.
In some ways, I may have used up some of my closing remarks airtime in response to your earlier question, Jamie. That was a great question. Well, I hear many themes that people have talked about, and I think that we talked about the fact that there are things in the short run that we've all had to do and that we need to do, but it's not a question of just doing what we've always done before. It's a question of doing things differently, thinking differently. It starts often with mindsets, but it also involves skill sets, and it does involve equity. It involves rethinking. I in the process of looking at some of the resources to better understand structural racism, I listened to part of a webinar by Kendi about the history of racial ideation in our society. And it started out really with the idea that the proposed idea or the circulated idea in society that Kaaryn, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, or Jamie, you're better educated on this than I am, but the Kendi lecture posed it this way, that it started out in many ways with the idea that it had to do with hate and bigotry and the kinds of attitudes that can only be solved by education. And education is definitely part of the equation, but as it got traced through how the variations of this changed as the point of view was put out there that no, first it's a necessary evil, no, it's an unnecessary evil, said the abolitionists. But in the process of looking at that, then someone said, no, it's a positive good. And that someone happened to be someone by the name of Calhoun, whose statue just came down for his racism. The very ironic thing, because we're talking about data, is that the next thing that happened was that there was a census, and Jarvis from Harvard, a Harvard statistician, decided to analyze the data. And as he analyzed the data, he found this little, discovered this fact that it was said that that mental health challenges and problems were higher among African Americans, Negroes, Blacks, whatever the census called them at that time, in the North than in the South. Which was used, of course, as ballast for this idea of, oh, we take care of our people, slavery is a positive good, until Jarvis reanalyzed the data and found out that there were the count of people with mental health who were, quote unquote, Black, was higher than the residents of Blacks in the North. So something was fishy with the data. And he, because he was a famous statistician, involved his colleagues in that society to go to Congress to get this looked at. Why are these statistics, today we would call them fake news, right? And guess whose hands it fell into? John Calhoun. So you can well imagine the very brief and cursory investigation that was, and this whole perpetuated myth was perpetuated in, at least in the world of ideas. But the point of all this long-winded story is that education is important, but the only thing that's really going to change things are policies and structures, as Josh, as you pointed out, that we can't rely solely on, on education, because then we're just putting it aside, and it might help individuals in some ways, but they struggle when they try to change things in society, and they run into such barriers, and it really is a loss for all of us, and a crime for us not to really pay attention to this. So maybe finishing up on the note that I started out, that we need to look not only at COVID itself, but we need to look at it's enmeshed and embedded, which is a theme that all of you brought out in the presentations that you gave. So thank you very much. And Brian, are we at the point where we thank people and close the seminar?
Well, there's one more question in the Q&A session. Actually, I would like to pose to any of the panelists who are present. Yeah. This question is from Dr. Kaplinger from Germany. And the question is, what kind of international collaboration is needed to address what just happened with COVID-19 and everything, with all this inequality as well?
Transparency, meaning that if you have a certain amount of data and you have COVID cases in your country, be transparent and timely in warning other countries so we could also prepare, and we will do the same. So we'll try to do the same.
I don't think there's ever been a global after action report, but I think that's what's necessitated if we did really want to learn from one another. So I don't know if that governing body exists right now, but learning across the board what each country, the success and the failures of combating COVID-19.
Well, with that, thank you, everyone. I think this discussion was very needed, and thank you all again for all the resources that you provided for TC and Columbia and New York and the world, actually. So thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Marsick. Thank you, everyone. And I think with that, we shall say goodbye and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay well, everybody. Thank you very much.
You too.